Trust is the most dangerous gift we give. These words would echo through the minds of everyone who knew Rebecca Chen and her neighbor Marcus Donovan after the truth finally surfaced. In the quiet suburbs of Millbrook, where manicured lawns and friendly waves masked darker secrets, one woman's desperation would lead to an act so calculated, so cold, that it would shatter an entire community's faith in human nature. Rebecca Chen had always been the kind of person who tried too hard. Born in Taiwan and immigrated to the United States when she was 12, she carried the weight of her parents' sacrifices like a stone in her chest. Her father worked double shifts at a factory while her mother cleaned offices at night, all so Rebecca could have the American dream they'd never experienced. The pressure was suffocating. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect daughter. But perfection, Rebecca would learn, was an impossible standard that would eventually consume her. At 34, Rebecca lived alone in a modest 2-story home on Maple Street, a house she'd stretched every dollar to afford. She worked as a financial advisor at a small firm downtown, helping others manage money while her own finances crumbled beneath crushing student loans and credit card debt. Her Instagram showed a life of quiet success, artfully arranged meals, weekend trips to nearby wineries, photos with friends who had no idea she was drowning. Rebecca had become an expert at painting over cracks, at making poverty look like prosperity. But the facade was beginning to crumble, and the woman behind the smile was fracturing. The loneliness was perhaps worse than the debt. Rebecca's parents had passed within 2 years of each other, her father from a heart attack, her mother from grief, leaving her truly alone in a country that still sometimes felt foreign. She dated sporadically, but relationships withered under the weight of her secrets. How do you tell someone you're falling apart when you've spent your entire life pretending to be perfect? So Rebecca smiled, paid minimum balances on maxed-out credit cards, and watched her neighbors through her kitchen window, wondering what it would feel like to truly belong. Marcus Donovan lived next door with a kind of effortless contentment that Rebecca both admired and envied. At 42, he was a successful software engineer who worked remotely, spending his days in his converted garage office and his evenings tending to a garden that looked like something from a magazine. Marcus was recently divorced but seemed to wear his newfound independence like a comfortable old sweater. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of genuine smile that made people feel heard. His modest colonial house was paid off, a fact he'd mentioned casually while helping Rebecca carry groceries one afternoon, not knowing how those words would haunt her dreams. Marcus had money. Not wealthy, but comfortable, secure. Everything Rebecca desperately needed, but could never seem to grasp. He drove a reliable Honda, took annual trips to visit his sister in Colorado, and most importantly, he trusted people. Marcus was the neighbor who collected packages, who had spare keys, who believed the best in everyone around him. He was, Rebecca realized with growing certainty, her salvation. The friendship between them had grown naturally over 2 years. Marcus would wave from his garden, and Rebecca would wave back from her porch. Small conversations about the weather became longer chats about work, which evolved into Marcus occasionally inviting her over for dinner when he'd made too much pasta. Rebecca treasured these evenings, not just for the free meal, but for the glimpse into a life without constant anxiety. Marcus's house was warm, lived in, real. No Instagram filters needed. What Marcus didn't know was that Rebecca had been watching him far more closely than a casual neighbor should. She knew his routines: morning coffee at 7 a.m. sharp, lunch break walks around the block at noon, evening garden time from 5 to 6 p.m. She knew he kept his spare key under a ceramic frog by his back door. She knew he paid bills online every Sunday morning and kept important documents in a fire safe in his bedroom closet. Most crucially, she knew he was planning a 2-week camping trip to Montana in September, his first solo adventure since the divorce. The plan took shape slowly, like poison seeping through soil. Rebecca told herself she was just borrowing what she needed to survive. Marcus had enough. More than enough. She could access his accounts, transfer just what she needed to get back on her feet, and pay it all back before he ever knew anything was missing. It wasn't stealing, she rationalized. It was a temporary loan from someone who wouldn't even notice the dent in his comfortable life. On September 8th, Marcus loaded his SUV with camping gear and drove away with an excited wave, calling out that he'd see her in 2 weeks. Rebecca waited until evening, then used the spare key to let herself into his house. Everything was exactly as she'd observed through casual visits. Orderly, peaceful, trusting. The fire safe wasn't even locked. Marcus had mentioned once that he'd forgotten the combination and just left it open, figuring his quiet neighborhood was safe enough. Rebecca's hands trembled as she photographed Marcus's banking information, social security card, and investment account statements. She told herself this was just research, just preparation. But over the next 3 days, sitting in her own kitchen with mounting bills spread across the table like accusations, Rebecca began transferring small amounts from Marcus's accounts to her own. 500 here, 1,000 there. Just enough to breathe again. But breathing wasn't enough anymore. The debt was too deep, the hole too wide. Rebecca found herself back in Marcus's house, night after night, taking more. The amounts grew larger, the justifications more desperate. Marcus had mentioned his ex-wife had taken half of everything in the divorce. Surely he wouldn't miss a little more? He'd talked about his successful career, his stock options, and his comfortable retirement savings. He could afford this. She needed it. By the time Marcus returned from Montana, tan and relaxed, and full of stories about mountain sunrises, Rebecca had transferred nearly $40,000 into various accounts and investments. She'd paid off 2 credit cards completely and made significant dents in her student loans. For the first time in years, she'd slept through the night without anxiety dreams about bankruptcy and homelessness. Marcus knocked on her door the evening after his return, holding a bottle of wine and a small carved wooden bear. "Picked this up for you at a gift shop in Glacier," he said with that genuine smile that now made Rebecca's stomach twist with guilt. "Thought you might like it." They sat on her porch as the sun set, Marcus sharing his adventures while Rebecca nodded and laughed in all the right places, the wooden bear clutched in her hands like evidence of her betrayal. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later. Marcus appeared at Rebecca's door with a confused expression, holding a bank statement. "This is going to sound crazy," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "But I think someone might have accessed my accounts while I was gone. The numbers don't add up." Rebecca's heart hammered as she invited him in, made concerned noises, and suggested he call his bank immediately. She even offered to help him review his statements, her own hands steady as she touched papers documenting her crimes. The investigation moved faster than Rebecca had anticipated. Banks have sophisticated fraud detection systems, and Marcus was methodical in his approach to the problem. Within days, digital forensics had traced the unauthorized access to activity during his camping trip. Security cameras at the bank, where Rebecca had made several large cash withdrawals, provided clear images of her face. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at Rebecca's office on a gray October morning, her badge catching the fluorescent light as she introduced herself to the receptionist. Rebecca saw her coming through the glass walls of her office and felt something die inside her chest. There would be no more pretending, no more carefully constructed facades. The game was over. "Miss Chen," Detective Martinez said, as she settled into the chair across from Rebecca's desk, "we need to talk about your neighbor, Marcus Donovan." What followed was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire case: Rebecca's complete confession. There were no tears, no dramatic breakdowns, no pleas for understanding. She simply nodded, closed the financial file she'd been working on, and began to speak. She told Detective Martinez everything with the same methodical precision she used to plan investment portfolios. The months of observation, the careful timing, the growing amounts, the elaborate lies she'd told herself to justify each transfer. "I never meant for it to go so far," Rebecca said, her voice eerily calm. "I just needed enough to breathe. But breathing wasn't enough. I needed enough to live without fear, and Marcus had enough to live without worry. It seemed fair." The detective would later describe Rebecca's demeanor as disturbingly rational. There was no remorse in her voice, no acknowledgement of the violation of trust or the impact on Marcus. She spoke about the theft as if she were describing a complex but necessary business transaction. Marcus's reaction, when he learned the full scope of the betrayal, was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "I trusted her," he told the detective, his voice breaking. "She sat on my porch, drank my wine, listened to my stories. She held the bear I brought her, and looked me in the eyes while she was robbing me blind." The financial loss was devastating. Marcus had to postpone his planned early retirement and take on additional consulting work to rebuild his savings. But the emotional damage ran deeper. The man who had believed the best in everyone suddenly found himself installing security systems and changing locks, unable to sleep without checking and rechecking his doors. At Rebecca's sentencing hearing, the courtroom was packed with neighbors from Maple Street, people who had thought they knew both women involved in this shocking betrayal. The prosecutor painted Rebecca as a calculating predator who had weaponized her neighbor's kindness. The defense attorney argued for mental health intervention, citing the pressure Rebecca had felt as an immigrant daughter and the isolation that had driven her to desperate acts. Judge Patricia Holloway was unmoved by the defense's arguments. "Trust is the foundation of community," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's tense silence. "The defendant didn't just steal money. She poisoned the well of human connection that allows neighborhoods like Maple Street to exist. She took advantage of genuine kindness and repaid it with calculated cruelty." Rebecca was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution. As the bailiff led her away, she turned back once to look at Marcus, who sat in the front row with his sister's hand on his shoulder. Their eyes met for just a moment, and witnesses would later disagree about what they saw in Rebecca's face. Some said it was finally, remorse. Others saw only the cold calculation that had driven her to befriend the man she was systematically destroying. The aftermath rippled through Millbrook like stones thrown in still water. Property values dipped as the story made national news. Neighbors who had shared keys and trusted each other with packages and pets suddenly found themselves installing cameras and changing locks. The community garden that Marcus had helped organize was abandoned. Too many people were uncomfortable with the idea of working side by side with people they might not truly know. Marcus eventually moved to Colorado to be closer to his sister, selling his house at a loss to a young couple who had never heard the story. Before he left, he planted a small memorial garden in his backyard, not for Rebecca, but for the version of himself that had believed trust was always worth the risk. "I don't want to become cynical," he told a reporter from the local paper, "but I also can't pretend that evil doesn't sometimes wear the face of a friend." The wooden bear Rebecca had clutched that evening on her porch, the gift Marcus had chosen for her while hiking mountains and thinking fondly of his kind neighbor, was entered into evidence at her trial. It sat on the prosecutor's table throughout the proceedings, a small carved reminder that monsters don't always announce themselves with fangs and claws. Sometimes they knock on your door with a smile and a bottle of wine, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to destroy everything you've built. In the end, Rebecca Chen's story serves as a chilling reminder that desperation can transform ordinary people into predators, and that the neighbors we trust most may be the ones watching us most carefully. In a world where we must choose between isolation and vulnerability, between loneliness and the risk of betrayal, Rebecca's calculated cruelty forces us to ask the most uncomfortable question of all. How well do we really know the people we let into our lives? Trust, after all, is the most dangerous gift we give, and sometimes the person most eager to receive it is the last person who deserves it.